I walked in on them kissing in my own bedroom. 3 weeks before my wedding. My sister. My fiancé. The man I had loved for 6 years. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just stood there holding a grocery bag, candles, his favorite wine, a card I had written that morning that said, "I can't wait to spend forever with you." I set the bag down. I turned around. And I walked out. Nobody came after me. But here is the part one have never told anyone. I went back inside. And through the door I heard Ryan say, "I have been in love with her since before you two even started dating. I just didn't know how to tell you." And my sister Lisa laughed softly and said, "I know. I could always tell." They had always known. Both of them. And they let me plan a wedding anyway. I slid down the hallway wall and I made a decision right there on the floor. I was not going to fight for a man who had never fully chosen me. I was going to disappear. And I was going to become someone they would never forget. 3 days later I booked a one-way flight to Singapore. I left a single note on the kitchen counter. It said, "The wedding is off. Be happy. No drama. No war." Just 2 words and a door closing behind me. Singapore hit me like a wall of heat and possibility. I had 3 months of savings, 1 suitcase, and no plan. I found a small apartment above a noodle shop. I applied to every job I could find. And on a Thursday afternoon, 2 rejections deep, I walked into an interview at a struggling logistics company called Voice Pacific, buried on page 4 of a job search. The office was too quiet. Either very calm or completely dying. Then the corner office door opened and out walked the man interviewing me. Tall. Quiet eyes. A face that gave nothing away. He looked at my resume for 4 seconds and said, "You have no experience in logistics." I said, "No. But I have experience building something from nothing. And right now that is probably what you need more." He stared at me. Then he said, "Monday. 8 a.m. Do not be late." That was Mark's tone. I had absolutely no idea the man who just hired me on the spot was worth $4 billion. The company was bleeding. Contracts gone. Senior staff gone. The particular silence of people who know the ship is sinking but nobody wants to say it. Mark barely looked at me that first month. He was not cold. He was just somewhere else. Always in the middle of a calculation nobody else could see. So I worked. I came in early. I stayed late. I learned the industry from scratch. And 2 months in, I walked into his office with a 14-page report I had written over a weekend. I said, "You are losing clients because your response time is 3 times the industry average. I found 4 bottlenecks. Here are the solutions. None of them need significant capital. They just need someone to implement them." He read all 14 pages while I stood there. Then he said, "How long have you known about this?" I said, 6 weeks. He said, "Why didn't you come sooner?" I said, "Because I wanted to be sure. I don't bring problems without solutions." Something shifted in his face. He said, "Implement it. Full authority. Report directly to me." Over the next 8 months we turned the company around. And somewhere in those late nights, in those arguments over strategy, in those moments where he pushed back and I pushed back harder, something else was happening between us that neither of us named out loud. Then one evening after a 12-hour day he ordered food, we sat on the boardroom floor eating takeout, and he said, "Tell me something real about yourself. Not your resume. Something real." And I told him everything. The grocery bag. The bedroom door. The note on the counter. He listened without interrupting. When I finished he said, "They didn't deserve your silence. But I'm glad you chose it. Because it brought you here." Something in my chest loosened that night that I hadn't even known was still tight. If you are still watching, good. Because what happens next I did not see coming. And neither will you. 3 months later, standing in a half-lit conference room after the biggest deal either of us had ever closed, Mark Stone looked at me and said, I have been trying to find the right moment for 4 months. There is no right moment. So I'm telling you now. I am in love with you. I said, the last time I trusted someone completely, I ended up on the floor of a hallway listening to my life fall apart. He said, I know. That is why I waited. I wasn't going to say anything until I was certain. And I am. We got married 14 months later on the rooftop of the building where we had once eaten takeout on the boardroom floor. 12 guests. No performance. Just a promise between two people who had both learned the hard way that love without honesty is just a beautiful lie. 3 years after I walked out of that bedroom, my father called. His retirement gala. 40 years of service. He asked me to come in a voice that was trying very hard not to sound like it was begging. I said yes. Mark held my hand on the flight home and said, we can leave anytime. The moment you say the word, we are gone. I said, I'll be fine. He said, I know. I'm just reminding you that you have options. That is the thing about being loved by the right person. They don't try to fix your pain. They just make sure you know you're not facing it alone. We arrived at 7:30. The ballroom was full. And then, across the room, I saw them. Ryan and Lisa. Standing near the bar. Lisa in something floral and slightly too young for the occasion, the way she always dressed when she was nervous and trying too hard. They hadn't seen me yet. For one single second I felt it. The ghost of the woman who had stood in that doorway holding a grocery bag. And then it passed. Because I was not that woman anymore. Lisa turned. Her eyes swept the room. They landed on me. She went absolutely still. Ryan followed her gaze. And then he went still too. I held eye contact with my sister for 3 seconds. Then I looked away. Not coldly. Just away. The way you move past something that no longer requires your attention. I found my father. I hugged him for a long time. He looked at Mark, extended his hand, and said, thank you for taking care of her. Mark shook it and said, she doesn't need taking care of. She just needed someone to keep up. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I knew before I turned around. Lisa said, Sarah. I turned. She looked tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has been carrying guilt for 3 years and found nowhere to put it. I said, Lisa. Hi. Ryan appeared at her shoulder. He looked at me the way people look at someone they've wronged when the apology they rehearsed won't come out. He said, you look amazing, Sarah. I said, thank you, Ryan. He looked at Mark. Something moved across his face. Then he said, is this your? I said, this is my husband, Mark. The word landed in the air between us like something solid. Ryan said, your husband. I said, yes. Mark extended his hand with the easy confidence of a man who has nothing to prove. Ryan shook it. He looked slightly dazed. I said, excuse us. I want to get my husband a drink. And I walked away. Not quickly. Not coldly. Just away. An hour later Lisa found me alone on the terrace. She said, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. I'm not going to say it just happened or that we couldn't help it. It wasn't inevitable. We chose it. I chose it. And I have had to live with that every single day. I said, okay. She said, okay. That's all? I said, what do you want me to say, Lisa? That I hate you? I don't. You took something from me that night. And then I took my life back. That is the whole story. She looked at the city. Then she said very quietly, are you happy? I said, I am. I really am. She said, I'm not. I said, I can't fix that. And I wouldn't even if I could. That's yours to walk through now. But I want you to know, I don't carry this anymore. Not the anger, not the grief, not the story of the sister who got left behind. That version of me is gone. I buried her and I built someone better. Lisa looked at me with the specific grief of someone watching what they chose to destroy. She said, I am so sorry, Sarah. I need you to know that. I said, I know. I believe you. And I went back inside. Not for her sake. For mine. Later that night my father stood at the microphone and said, my daughter taught me that walking away quietly is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. She walked away and she walked straight into her own life. I could not be prouder. Mark found my hand in the dark and held it. And I thought, this is what I almost gave up. We left at 10:30. In the car Mark said, what are you thinking? I said, I'm thinking about the note I left on the counter 3 years ago. Be happy. 2 words. And I think I meant it even then. Some part of me knew that letting go cleanly was the kindest thing I could do, for them and for myself. He said, and are they happy? I thought about Lisa's face on the terrace. Ryan's expression when he heard the word husband. I said, no. Not the way they hoped. He said, and you? I looked at him, this quiet extraordinary man who had looked at a 14-page report and seen someone worth knowing. I said, I am the happiest I have ever been in my life. And I built every bit of it myself. With a little help. He said, only a little. I said, don't push it. If you are in the middle of your worst moment right now, if you are the person on the floor, holding the grocery bag, writing the quiet note, I need you to hear this. The pain is not the destination. It is the departure point. You are not the person who got left behind. You are the person who is about to begin. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. And if you're going through something that feels impossible right now, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I'm Sarah Stone. I walked in on them kissing in my own bedroom 3 years ago. Best thing that ever happened to me.